Hello, my friend. Welcome to Perfect Fit Pets, where we help match you with the right pet for your lifestyle. How can I help you out today?
Yeah, I've been thinking about getting a pet. I'm just not really sure what direction to go. I've thought about ferrets and other animals, but I'm just not really sure if that's right for me.
Okay, I hear you. Now, what are some of your deal breakers?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy. I'm just really sensitive to strong smells. I don't like anything that's stinky or oily. Anything like that's just kind of a no for me.
Yet, one of the animals that you mentioned interest in is a ferret, and ferrets are notoriously smelly animals on account of their diet and their stink glands.
Yeah, but I could just remove their scent glands, right? That would be fine. Then they wouldn't be so smelly, and then I'd get the animal that I want, right?
We at Perfect Fit Pets absolutely do not condone removing the scent glands of a ferret, as it can reduce both their quality of life and their lifespan, so it's likely not the right fit for you. Are you someone who works at home? Do you have a lot of time to spend with your animal?
I don't work from home. Actually, I work about an hour away. I've got about an hour long commute.
Okay, if you're commuting a lot, it's likely that something as social as a ferret is not a good fit, as these animals need constant stimulation from either other pets or yourself. So, do you plan on getting multiple animals?
I really only want one pet right now. I feel like that's right for me. I only want one more pet.
Gotcha. If you are not interested in getting multiple animals at this time, which I totally respect, and you don't like animals that smell bad, then ferrets really aren't for you. I think any of the small mammals, like rats, are also probably off the table. Would you consider something like a reptile?
I feel like you're not really listening to me. I think I want a ferret.
Listen, I totally understand wanting a ferret. They are super cute, they're super personable, and they are a ton of fun. I just don't think they're the right match for you, given everything that you've told me. There may come a time in your life where these things are less important to you, and you may be able to reconsider getting a ferret. It just doesn't make sense right now. Maybe something like a lizard would be a better option. I think you would love maybe a blue-tongued skink.
Yeah, thanks for your time. I think I'm just gonna go with a ferret.
My friends, we need to talk. We need to talk about pets because keeping pets can be one of the most incredibly rewarding and enriching experiences of our day to day lives, but you probably suck at choosing the right pet. I understand that everyone wants something a little bit different out of their pet keeping experience, but why are all of us terrible at ensuring that we actually receive that experience when we choose our pets? Originally, I was actually trying to make a video about what reptile keepers can learn from dog people, or what reptile keepers can learn from fish keepers. But the more I looked into more different niche pet groups, the more I learned that people are just really bad at choosing a pet that actually fits their lifestyle. Whether it's because they're chasing a trend or they're overlooking an obvious gap in their own experience level, people just get into pets that make no sense for them. Let's talk about it. My name is Cole. This is Kvoth. Welcome back to Boas and Buffoonery. So you suck at pet selection, but what is pet selection? What actually goes into the decision making process about what animal you bring into your home? Well, first and foremost, you need to evaluate what you want out of a pet. It can be very simple and very broad. Someone like myself who loves reptiles may start with the sentence, I want a pet reptile. And that's a perfectly fine place to start. It can be as broad as I like reptiles, therefore I want a pet reptile, but it can be something much more specific. It could be I feel unsafe in my community, therefore I want an animal for protection. At which point you're likely to narrow down your search to a well-trained guard dog of some sort. There is still a continued selection process from there to determine what specific breed you may be interested in, but that does help to narrow your search. I actually think that this point of the evaluation process is something that most people are already pretty good at. Most people are already pretty good at telling you what they want. What they're not always very good at is describing their deal breakers, which I think is the second point of evaluation. For many people, the deal breaker could be something as simple as I am allergic to fur and hair, so I don't want an animal that has fur or hair. Or a deal breaker may be that I don't like the smell of a certain animal, or I don't like this general type of smell. I'm sensitive to it, so they won't pursue an animal or shouldn't pursue an animal that has that sort of scent. And for other people, it's fear based. Maybe a snake or a tarantula would fit perfectly into their lifestyle, but they're scared of snakes or they're scared of spiders. So they're not going to keep a pet in their home that, even if they were to overcome that fear, it's unlikely they develop some deep obsession or deep love with that type of animal. So they may not take the best care of that animal. So they're going to avoid animals that they're afraid of, which makes perfect sense. I think honestly evaluating your deal breakers is incredibly important when pursuing a pet of any kind. It goes hand in hand with doing your research about what animal you want. But beyond that, you also need to evaluate your limitations. You need to be able to understand what your shortcomings might be as a pet keeper and choose a pet not only based on your wants and your deal breakers, but also your limitations. If you are someone who works a ton and travels for work, it is unlikely that a hyper social animal that needs consistent interaction with you is the right pet for you. You probably don't want a dog or a rat or a ferret because these are incredibly social animals and their time with you is going to be very important to their health and well being. But on the flip side, if you're someone who works from home and wants to spend a great deal of time training and engaging and playing with your pet, it is unlikely that a blood python is going to be the right pet for you. With the assumption that you're only going to have one pet or you're only bringing in one pet at a time. But this is where the balancing act exists. You need to pick an animal that you are excited about, that you will fall in love with, that also fits into your lifestyle, and that you are not the limiting factor in that animal thriving. You should be the catalyst for that animal to have the best possible life, and that animal should be enriching your life. You should be stoked about your pet. This seems like a really simple and straightforward thought process. So where does it go wrong? And I think people go wrong with their pet selection in two main ways. The first of those two ways is they get an animal that is too much for them. And the second main way is they get an animal that is not enough. Let's break that down. What do I mean by an animal that is too much for you? I mean an animal that has a level of care requirements that you can't provide, at least right now. Whether that is a financial commitment that you can't afford, whether that is a time commitment that your job or your lifestyle doesn't allow for, or whether it's a level of training and activity and time that you just don't have the physical abilities to commit to an animal. A really easy example in the dog world is something like a husky. These animals are remarkably beautiful, and it's really easy to see why people fall in love with huskies. But if you are someone who works a lot, isn't home very often, and when you are at home doesn't like to be active, like if you are a generally sedentary person, if most of your hobbies involve kind of sitting on your couch watching TV or playing video games or board games or card games, then it's unlikely that a husky is the right pet for you because they require such a high level of energy output. They want to go on runs, they want to go on hikes, and they also require a high level of mental stimulation. So you're not like a bad person for having sedentary hobbies. It just means that when you're considering the right dog and you're considering the right pet, it's unlikely that a husky is going to be that right fit. In the reptile world, this most frequently shows up in animals that are particularly large and exist in multiple different types of environments. I'm thinking about animals that are semi-aquatic, semi-arboreal, and particularly large, whether that is giant snakes or monitor lizards or tegus, or some people keep crocodilians. These are animals that have such a high level of care requirement that most people just practically can't provide. There are people who can. There are people who spend a lot of time at home. There are people that have large properties. There are people that can build and create beautiful, massive, enriching enclosures, even for these hardest of the hardest animals to take care of. But that's not most people. Most people get kind of in over their heads when looking to take care of these animals, often resulting in that animal receiving subpar care. But on the flip side of an animal that is just too much for you is an animal that doesn't do enough for you, an animal that isn't enough for you. Now, this might seem sort of counterintuitive. I've talked a lot about people kind of stretching their own limits for their pet, or a pet that doesn't fit within the boundaries of what that particular person is capable of providing. But there is absolutely a reverse to that, where someone gets an animal because they think they're cute or they think they're cool, but it just doesn't scratch the itch that that person is looking for. Like, if you are looking for a companion animal and you want to spend a lot of time interacting with that animal one-on-one, it is unlikely that most types of fish are going to provide that for you. And even though you may put in a great deal of work to set up a beautiful fish tank, it is unlikely that the day-to-day maintenance of that tank is going to fulfill the desire to interact with an animal on a daily basis. That's not saying there are no fish that fill this criteria, and that's not to say that no one does receive the amount of like stimulation that they want from just interacting with the tank and the enclosure, but it's just less likely. If you are someone who is looking to train an animal to a high level, if you are someone who wants an animal that is excited to see you when you come home, it is unlikely that a blood python like my friend Kvoth here is going to fulfill that want or that need for you. Now, I love Kvoth, and I love coming home and looking in his enclosure and seeing if I can spot him, but there's a reason that that is a challenge, because he spends most of his time hiding. I also only handle him about once every week or two on the high end, and he only eats once every 2 to 3 weeks. So I don't actually spend a great deal of time with Voth, even though he's maybe my favorite animal that I have. The reality is that spending any more time with Kvoth would just be detrimental to him and detrimental to our relationship.
Hey, that's what Pat said.
And if you're not the type of person that wants to think about that, then a blood python's probably not the right pet for you, and probably not even the right pet snake.
Also, sorry, Pat. I am just kidding. You're still my goat.
Look, the reality is that most pet snakes are not particularly social, but there are snakes that are more curious, more active, more apt to learning certain things, and at the end of the day seem more social. So you can make choices for yourself to get a snake that is a little bit more social. I think one of the easiest examples of an animal that sort of becomes not enough for people is pet turtles and pet tortoises. I see it a lot where people are really, really excited to get a pet turtle or a pet tortoise, and they love keeping their pet turtle or tortoise for the first 6 months to a year most of the time. It is incredibly fun and exciting to try to learn how to set up an enclosure, especially for aquatic turtles, because most people who keep aquatic turtles don't have a ton of experience working with water parameters. And that is an interesting puzzle to figure out. However, what I think ends up happening most of the time with pet turtles is they become more of a chore than a pet. You need to have a very regular cleaning schedule for your pet turtles to make sure that they stay healthy. And outside of cleaning their tank, they don't really do much. Yes, they are kind of fun to hang out with, but they're not really super handleable for the most part. And there are, of course, exceptions to this rule. I think some of the most interesting turtles that you can keep are things like stinkpot or musk turtles, or if you don't live in Ontario and you can legally and successfully keep snapping turtles, I think that's one of the coolest types of turtle that you can keep just because they're so full of personality. But when I think of things like red ear sliders or yellow belly sliders, these turtles that parents got as pets for their kids, and they end up being rehomed. Because as exciting as getting a pet turtle is, they don't really do much. They kind of end up becoming pet rocks and more of a chore than a pet. So we've talked about what you should do when choosing your next pet, and we've also discussed how this goes wrong, but the real question is why? But I think why people go wrong with picking the right pet for them is really obvious. It's because they're not subscribed to this YouTube channel. I think if they were subscribed to this YouTube channel, they would never make make a pet care or pet keeping mistake ever again in their life. Obviously, I'm joking, but if you guys could do me an absolutely huge favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, consider joining as a member. You get perks such as access to our community Discord, as well as a monthly live stream where you can ask me all the questions that you want about reptiles, about animals in general, or about whatever game we might be playing. But thank you so much for considering. Let's get back into the video and talk about why actually people get the wrong animals for them. Why do people ignore their wants, their needs, their expectations, their limitations in favor of an animal that just doesn't fit their lifestyle? And I think there's a bunch of reasons, but by far the most common is the cool or the cute factor. I mean, this is what leads people to get the bigger snake over the smaller snake, right? Because it makes them look like more of a badass to the people in their lives that don't keep reptiles, but it's also what leads people to purchase a newborn kitten from a lousy breeder as opposed to adopting an adult, established, well-mannered cat from their local humane society. People want the cute. People want the cool, and oftentimes that trumps any logical thought about, would this animal actually enrich my life, and would I actually be able to provide this animal with proper care? But it's not just being cool or being cute. Another huge issue is trendiness. So many people chase trends with their pets. One of the most egregious examples of this is a few years back, sugar gliders became incredibly popular. Why? Not because people suddenly realized that sugar gliders make great pets, because for the most part, they don't. But a couple TikTokers became very, very popular for having sugar gliders because they're so cute and they're so odd and they're so unique, and they seem really practical on the surface because they're small mammals that are actually smaller than things like rats and guinea pigs, and they are incredibly social, so it is easy to bond to a sugar glider. The flip side of that is that sugar gliders are incredibly social animals. They either need to be bonded with another sugar glider, or if they're bonded with you, they need to spend almost all of their time with you. Or they could get depressed to the point where they can get sick and they could pass away from loneliness, similar to something like a rat or a ferret. But a lot of people just overlooked that little hiccup because they're so cute, they're so cool, and they've become popular on social media. We see this all the time with dog breeds. We see how quickly a dog breed can come from completely unknown to overly popular and often end up in the hands of the wrong people. I mean, look at Belgian Malinois. How many of you 10 years ago knew what a Belgian Malinois even was, but then they became the police dog. They become the trainable dog. They became the protection dog. And as awesome as Malinois are, they're really not a good pet dog for most people. They're remarkable working breeds, but they're not typically a good pet dog unless you really know what you're doing. That's not to say that all of them can't be, or that no one could keep a Belgian Malinois as a pet, because there are plenty of people who can and do a great job of it, but their popularity is mostly due to trend than it is like people critically considering the dog that they want and evaluating that Belgian Malinois are the specific breed that fits their lifestyle best. And beyond just trendiness, there is just a lack of good information available to us on the internet about different pets. And there is so much bad information out there that it often overweighs the good information. I think potentially the group of animals that is most punished by our lack of good information is actually small mammals. Things like guinea pigs, other rodents, ferrets, we talked about sugar gliders, because these animals are often touted as like a great first pet or a pet for a kid. And I think on account of them having relatively short lifespans and being small, and the cages that are sold on the market being so simplistic, they are often given very shoddy care, not because people are trying to abuse these animals, but because the readily accessible information about them tells them that what they're doing is best for that animal, that putting them in a small enclosure with simple aspen shavings as a bed and maybe a couple hides and a water bowl, whatever access to food that you provide them is good enough for that animal because they're cheap, they're small, and they're ultimately kind of replaceable. I think this leads small mammals to be some of the most neglected pets on the planet. And these can make fantastic and super, super interesting pets if you just actually care for them well. And the reptile hobby is absolutely criminal when it comes to bad care advice being prevalent on the internet. Now, it is getting better. There are more and more keepers pushing naturalistic enclosures, pushing enrichment, pushing that these animals are thoughtful, intelligent beings. However, there is still a huge sentiment of like, rack keeping is still the best. As long as you have them at the right humidity and the right temperature, that animal's going to do just fine. As long as they're eating and breeding, then they are healthy. And this just isn't true, but so many people think like that because of course they do, because that is what has been yelled at us for years. That has been the like prevailing information for decades at this point. So it is going to take a good deal of time for us to help people unlearn these bad habits when it comes to keeping reptiles. Finally, I think the last reason why people frequently get a pet that just doesn't match their lifestyle is they create sort of an ideal situation in their head that just isn't realistic, and it catches up to them. What I mean by this is I think oftentimes people will get, say, a pet dog with the hope that having an active dog will make them more active. This is something that I hear a lot, especially when people get things like huskies, things like labs, things like Belgian Malinois, that, oh, if I get this animal, it will push me to become an active person. And my advice to those people oftentimes is, well, why don't you just try to become more active first and then look into getting said dog? I don't think that someone who is sedentary should never get an active dog. I just think that getting an animal and relying on that animal to change your behavior patterns is a really bad idea in most situations. It works sometimes, but I think more often than not, you just end up seeing really, really active animals, really intelligent animals not get the stimulation that they need. And that's why you end up seeing so many like obese labs and obese huskies and obese like border collies, right? These dogs that need such a high level of activity that end up being sedentary because you are, and you've forced your lifestyle upon that animal, and you have negatively impacted their health. In the reptile world, I think again, you kind of see this most frequently with large to giant snakes in particular. And this is actually something that I've had to check myself on multiple times. There is absolutely this philosophy that some people have when they're getting a pet reptile that, oh, I have the ability to keep a juvenile or a baby or a sub-adult right now, and by the time that animal is a full-grown adult, I will have the money, the space, and the time to put into keeping the adult version of that animal. And for myself, I have thought many times that maybe I should just go for it, go get that anaconda, which is a dream animal of mine, one that I want to keep in the future. I want to have an anaconda, and theoretically, I could keep a juvenile to potentially a subadult right now. But I know that I don't have the time, money, or space to keep an adult anaconda right now, so I'm not going to go and get the baby with the hope and a prayer that by the time that animal's an adult, I can take care of it. But a lot of people do. A lot of people get like a baby Burmese python because they're super, super cute and they don't grow particularly fast, with the plan that by the time they're a full-grown adult, they will be in a different financial and a different living situation that will enable them to care for that animal. The reality is, life can hit you in a million different ways. And as much as we would all like to think that as we get older, we're going to be more financially stable in a better living situation, a lot of the times that doesn't happen, or at least it doesn't happen on like a linear path. People run into hiccups, people run into complications, and you can't put yourself in a situation where if you get stuck financially, or if you get stuck in a bad living situation, or you may have to move in with your parents in your 30s, because that happens to people often of no fault of their own, you are not going to be able to properly care for your pet that you took on. especially animals that are as long lived as reptiles, are a massive, massive commitment, and you need to be prepared to take care of them throughout their entire lifespan. And I think getting a baby with the intention of growing with it is a really cool thought that just isn't super practical for most people. But those are just a few of my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Did I nail it? Did I properly describe why people get pets that just don't make sense for them? Do you disagree with me? Do you think there's another reason that I missed that leads people to get pets that just don't work with their living situation and lifestyle? Regardless, thank you so very much for watching this video. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, an awesome rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.